I have children and I think they're hypermobile. What do I need to watch out for, and should I limit their activity? It can be a challenge and a struggle. And we have to work with our kids a little bit different, partially because they respond different than adults. They don't always like the big lectures that, this is what you should do and why. And also, we don't want to create those situations where you're butting heads with your kids all the time. There's enough areas that we're having to focus with trying to get our kids to eat right, take care of themselves, keep up with school. We don't want to create another point of contention with learning how to take care of their body and their system. Now, if you feel like your kids might be hypermobile, I would go with your gut. You don't necessarily need someone else to tell you that your kid is super flexible and has sloppy joints. Even if you can't necessarily diagnose a genetic condition, that's always something that you can look at adding in later. You can start teaching them some of the basics now, because the basics are good for everyone. It's not just people with hypermobility that should have good posture or should be careful with their activity. It's everyone across the board. It just might be a little more important for those hypermobile kids. We don't want our hypermobile kids to develop the same pain patterns that we have if they don't have to. So the nice thing is you can actually start leading your kids down that path, helping them to identify and improve their issues before they get started. So a couple things to think about in terms of what to watch out for. Big one is collision sports. Sports where there's a lot of impact either with the ground or with other players, unprotected impact. Those tend to be areas that are really tough on people who are hypermobile. So things like football, soccer. Soccer is a big one. There's a lot of collision that happen, particularly at higher levels. Rugby, that would be a good one to stay away from. Also watch dance and gymnastics. So these things that use a lot of that flexibility. Now, with all of these sports, at lower levels, younger kids, they are great. They can work on balance and coordination, movement patterns. They are such good things to be a part of. Where the issues come is as they progress into those higher, more competitive and elite levels, where they're pushing their bodies harder, the quantity of the amount of time that they're spending doing it is higher, and the risk and issue with those collisions becomes greater. That's when we have to kind of watch it. And if you start seeing injury happen, put a stop to it in the beginning as you start to see those problems, rather than 3 knee surgeries later or 4 concussions later, trying to come in and fix it at that time. Definitely watch quantity. When you have a child who's hypermobile, doing the multiple sports all year round is really hard on a system. It's hard on anyone. And if you're hypermobile and you don't get those rest breaks, it's even harder on you. So if your kid loves to be active, that's great. If they're playing multiple sports at once, make sure that you put a break in there, whether it's summer, winter, but have them take a good solid 1 to 2 months off a year where they're just having fun. They're not playing those competitive sports, and it actually allows their body to heal up instead of developing these recurring strain patterns. Encourage good posture, and this is something all of us can do with our kids, but particularly if you're concerned about your kids being hypermobile, it is so important. Don't let them develop those bad habits about working on their laptop on the couch, using that slouchy posture where they're curled up in a ball for hours on end. Don't let them sit on their phone in their bed for an hour. Make sure that they have good places to study. So this is something as parents that we can provide, whether it's a kitchen table, a countertop, a desk space, but make sure that they have an area where they can do it and they can be in a good position and they have a good chair and don't kind of do the curl up in a ball rotated position, so that way they can start with that good posture and not develop those habits. Start talking to them when they're little about not sleeping on their stomach and using those side lying or lying on your back positions first. That can go a long way to kind of creating a nice solid base for them moving forward. Same thing with standing, getting them in the habit of standing on 2 feet, which sounds kind of silly, but where you're not shifted to the side where you have all your weight on one leg. And encourage them to be active, support them in wanting to be active and run and bike and be mobile, because they are going to need to be strong kids. And sitting around at home on an electronic device or playing video games, they're not getting stronger. So we have to support them in whatever way we can to make sure that they are staying active. And whether that's being part of a sport or a club, or having a trampoline, or having video games that involve a lot of movement and activity, whatever works for you and your household, those are the things you want to support and gravitate toward. But don't make it a fight. Do encourage self-correction, but keep your phrases small. So where I see parents and kids really start to have issues is when the parent is always correcting the kid. And one of the things I try and teach my clients when I've got kids in the clinic is that, we can cue them. They don't always need to know why, but they can know that they have to sit up tall. And when they start to slouch, you can say, you're sitting on your pockets, sit up tall. And then, once we've kind of done that and they know where they're supposed to be and they're still slouching, you can say, check your posture, what are you doing? And get them to start to self-correct. Now, part of that is finding those cues that seem to work with your kids, doesn't seem to be intrusive, and you're going to have to try a few different techniques to find one that's going to work with your child. For my kids at home, I'll tell you, I've got a couple of girls that'll tend to walk knock-kneed, they tend to toe in, and I'm real big about toes forward. So I'll be walking somewhere and I'll nudge one of my girls and tell her, get your toes forward. Same thing, W sitting, for all of you out there that are W sitters, where you sit with your feet behind you. That is a huge no-no if you're hypermobile. So if your kid likes to sit down and watch TV, if they like to sit down and play on the floor, that's one where I will immediately start with feet have to be forward. So you can sit crisscross applesauce, but your feet have to be in front of you. And so when they sit like that, I'll be like, where are your feet? Feet have to be forward. And so they get in the habit of doing that. Embrace when you need to. So I've had some other questions about, do braces make you weak? You brace for what you need, not so that you don't have to do the other stuff. And so if you have kids who middle school age and are playing sports, I ankle brace my kids, both sides. They don't always wear them, I will tell you that. Even my college kid doesn't always wear them, but they have them and they know they're supposed to wear them. And I do that because it's injury prevention. Now, they don't wear ankle braces the rest of the day, but they wear them for their impact sports to try and minimize and prevent those ankle sprains that I know that they're prone to. That is a good way to use them. Now, same thing with knee braces. If you've got that kneecap instability where your kneecap's going all over, absolutely, if you're a softball pitcher or a softball catcher, I'm gonna throw you in a brace because you need that extra support for that stability that you don't have. But it's a sport or activity specific. If you like to hike, great. Let's put a brace on you to give you that extra support. But it's going to be for that. It's not going to be all the time, all day long. That's what you're gonna live in. Or if we needed to start with it, then we're going to work on training you out. until it's just for yard work, just for hiking, just for soccer, and that's going to help with that. Orthotics, I love kids in orthotics. I put my kids in orthotics, and that's because they need that extra support. They get those fallen arches, they get to where their foot starts tracking out. Mine's kids turn in, but they need that additional support, particularly for their athletics. So the running, the basketball, the volleyball, the jumping sports, having that extra support is really helpful. And particularly while they're growing. Though that junior high 11 to 16 growing phase, that is huge. Your body's stretching out, you've got hormonal changes. That's when the majority of injuries happen, is our kids are trying to be active, they're doing stuff, and they're going through this growth phase, and it's hard for their body to keep it all together, particularly if they're hypermobile to start with. So, don't be afraid to advocate for bracing in those instances. And sometimes, I've seen kids on both ends of the spectrum. Kids that want to brace and really don't need it, and kids that really don't want to brace because it makes them different. You have to kind of look at your child and how much issues they're having and decide how much you want to push that issue. And definitely come from a standpoint, if you're working with kids, that this is a teaching opportunity. This is a chance for you to make their path different from yours. So if you've developed a pain pattern, this allows you to change their future and adjust to where they're learning how to take care of their body. They're learning how to sit well and make those choices from the beginning, rather than getting into bad habits and then having to go back and relearn what they should have been doing all along. And so it gives those kids an opportunity to not have pain, to not be injured. And sometimes we don't think of that as being an option. But when you know how to take care of yourself from the beginning, you have good tissues to work with. And so a lot of times kids can do a much better job moving forward. Now, that's still a spectrum, so if you have a child who is super unstable, that even the more active sports may be harder for them, and you may have to brace more often. But helping them to be active in whatever option that is so important for them physically, mentally, and developmentally. So please encourage them to continue that.